Chapter 17:11. Before she knew it, her face was already covered in tears. These tears were for Su Cheng, but how could it not be for herself? Meanwhile, downstairs, Kim slowly held onto Su Cheng's hand. His gaze fell on her face, which was no longer fair, but rather a little dark. She seemed to have matured a little, and was no longer as childish as before. She was somewhat mature, so mature that it made his heart ache. Perhaps this was the reason why he had not dared to look at her for the past year. Ching Chung, let's go home. His voice was soft. She could not believe it. Home? Could she really do it? My mom agreed. Didn't you hear what she said? Kim's voice was rather relaxed, and there was no special sorrow in it. It was also because Mama He's health had not been good these past few years, and she was often sick. Sometimes, it was a form of relief for her to leave. When he said that, Su Cheng stopped in her tracks. She looked left and right, and the expression on her face was much more varied. She did not look like she had when she first came back. Did she say it? She swallowed hard, and her face was filled with, "Don't scare me." Kim smiled faintly. I heard it anyway. They walked into the elevator, and when they reached his floor, they opened the door and entered. As soon as they entered, she was dragged inside, and her body was pressed against the heavy door. He hugged her, and his head was pressed against her neck as he breathed lightly. He didn't say a word. He just hugged her, hugging her gently. At first, Su Cheng was not used to it. After all, they had not seen each other for a long time. It was a little strange, and she was also a little shy. But after a while, her hands hesitantly hugged his waist, and her face was buried in his shoulder. Just like that, the hug became tighter and tighter. Finally, as if he could not control himself, he kissed her lips. It was as if all the passion had been ignited. This kiss was light at first, mixed with the pain of his mother's death, and the long-lost feelings. At first, she did not dare to respond to him, and she had forgotten how it felt. But he was very patient, and he led her over and over again. Finally, her hands climbed up his neck. He lifted her up and carried her to his bedroom. She covered her eyes with her hands, not daring to look at him. Shuan, don't why. He firmly removed her hand, intertwined his fingers with hers, and fell down together. His gaze was gentle as he took off her coat and sweater with one hand and threw them at the end of the bed. Then it was his piling up one by one until it became a mess. She put her hand over her heart nervously. Don't look. Why? His voice was hoarse. Why won't you watch? Su Cheng's voice trembled. Because it's ugly. Her body was no longer as beautiful as it was in the past. After giving birth, there were some fine lines on her body. It was very ugly. Even she felt that she was ugly, let alone a man. However, Kim firmly removed her hand and raised it high above her head. She closed her eyes in shame and turned her face away. Don't look. Chung Chung, you're beautiful, really. He moved closer to her ear. Tonight is not a good time, but I miss you. The two of them only had this one night. She did not know when they would meet again. Even Yi-Huan, she only glanced at him from afar. She refused to look anymore and let someone carry her away. How could he not know what she was thinking? Although the child was young, she did not want it to be tainted by her. Chapter 17:12. Just as he had said, it wasn't a good time. But after tonight, there wouldn't be another night like this. He was very gentle, afraid that he would scare her. Su Cheng wasn't the Su Cheng of the past. She had been extremely reserved the entire night. She was extremely jerky, but it was precisely this jerkiness that made her look especially gentle and alluring. After a few rounds, she lay in his arms, drenched in sweat, her slender arms wrapped around his waist. She was obviously very sleepy, but she couldn't bear to sleep. Kim was the same. He was leaning against the headboard, holding a cigarette in his hand. He didn't smoke much, and his gaze was lowered as he looked at her. Su Cheng looked up, her eyes glistening. Shuheng, if there's a good woman, then let's get together. Don't worry about me. Kim paused, his gaze lowered as he looked at her for a long time. After a long time, he finally said, Are you sure? There was a hint of imperceptible sternness in his voice. Su Cheng grunted and said slowly, I still have 8 years left. I can't get any more reductions. So, you're afraid of dragging me down. Is that so? He asked very softly. Su Chang didn't deny it. Then what are you doing now? Did you come out from there just to have a PvP? His tone was very rude and not very pleasant to hear. Her eyes widened slightly. She couldn't believe that he would say such a rude word. Her chin was pinched and his gaze was burning. Su Chang, you think you're doing this for my own good. Just like back then, you turned yourself in and wanted to help everyone. Have you ever thought about me? His voice became deeper and deeper until it was almost hoarse. She wanted to retreat, but he held her waist and she was pinned down again. His fingers pinched her cheeks, and there was an unusual fervor in his eyes as he muttered, "Don't even think about leaving me again." He angrily blocked her lips and kissed her mercilessly, as though he was punishing her. Su Chang couldn't struggle, and she didn't want to struggle. When his anger subsided and his face was buried in her neck, she caressed the back of his neck with her fingers and comforted him softly. "I won't go." She suddenly hugged his neck tightly and cried, "Come, I'm not leaving. I won't leave again unless you kick me out." She hugged him like a child. After such a long separation and so many changes, she would also be afraid if she couldn't see him. "Come, I'm scared too. What I'm most afraid of is that you look at me with contempt. What I'm most afraid of is that you don't want me anymore. What I'm most afraid of is that you think it's a disgrace to have such a mother and won't let me see you on." However, he still wanted her. He actually wanted her. How happy she was right now. Her eyes were filled with tears, and they stained his neck. It was wet and warm, making him feel extremely uncomfortable. He turned her little face and kissed her forcefully. Their long-awaited bodies were once again entangled together. That night, they were each other's consolation as they licked each other's wounds. From night till dawn, they didn't separate at all. However, she only had 2 days. At 2 in the afternoon the next day, Yu Liangxiu came over as well. Kaim drove her to the northern suburbs. When Su Chang was about to enter, she turned around and looked at Yu Liangxiu. She mouthed something silently. Yu Liangxiu didn't hear it clearly, but she understood what Su Chang meant. She nodded as her eyes misted up. She thought that compared to Su Chang, her relationship with Anlin was nothing. Chapter 17:13. Su Chang stood outside the high wall with tears in her eyes. She looked at Kaim and didn't move for a long time. Kaim closed the car door and walked over slowly. He held her shoulder gently and pulled her into his arms. "Shuheng." She rested her face on his shoulder and said in a low voice, "Don't be too nice to me. I'm afraid I won't be used to it." She still had to go into atone for her sins. It was tough inside, but her heart was calm. It seemed that with every minute of suffering, she was one step closer to him. She took a step back and looked at him with clear reluctance in her eyes. She lowered her head and looked at his neck. When she looked up again, her eyes were resolute. "Take care of our child." She finally dared to say to him, "Wait for me to come back." Kaim stood and didn't say anything. He only squeezed her hand. She was about to leave, but he didn't let go. He said in a hoarse voice, "I'll come and see you." Su Chang didn't say anything else. She retreated bit by bit, leaving his world and his warmth. She really shouldn't come and see him often. She said softly, "It's okay." She smiled sweetly at him. Kaim watched her leave with tears in his eyes. His mother had left, and he had to see her again. If it weren't for Liangxiu, he might not have had the courage to do so. He only turned around when he couldn't see Su Chang anymore. Yu Liangxiu stood beside the car and looked straight in the direction where Su Chang had left. When she met Kaim's gaze, she pursed her lips and smiled. "Let's go back." It would take 2 hours to drive back to the city. There was a traffic jam at night, and they might not be able to reach there by 8 o'clock. Kaim nodded, but he still turned around to look at the high wall. The woman he loved the most was trapped here. On the way back, Liangxiu was still driving. She was afraid that Kaim wouldn't be able to concentrate, so he was obviously distracted. "We still have a chance to see each other in the future," she comforted him softly. In the past, Kaim had helped her a lot. What she was doing now was just scratching the surface. Kaim smiled bitterly and raised his head. Tears welled up in his eyes. He let out a long sigh. "It's so bitter inside. How could you get used to it?" Yu Liangxiu pursed her lips and replied, after a long while, "It's impossible for her to get used to it. She's just getting used to it. She paused for a moment. Kime, she just wants to turn herself into the best Su Chung to match you. How could he not know? It was just that the price was a little too high. As the car sped along the highway, Kime's voice suddenly rang out. He went to France for something more important? It's not what you think. Yu Liangxiu tightened her grip on the steering wheel and smiled nonchalantly. You mean President Qin and Xia Mian are sharing a room in Paris? She said it casually. Kime tilted his head and stared at her for a long while before saying, President Qin doesn't have that kind of feelings for her. Really? Yu Liangxiu didn't speak and focused on driving. It wasn't until they reached his apartment that she turned her face and said softly, Kime, that's not important. What's important is that if the ATV can't be kept, I don't have the right to question who he's with, right? Kime's face twisted and he sighed. I might have to offend you later. Yu Liangxiu smiled and changed the topic. Go back and have a good rest. Chapter 17:14. Kime nodded and got out of the car. Yu Liangxiu sat in the car, but didn't get out immediately. Instead, she took out a magazine from the cabinet in front of her. She opened it and saw that the first issue was about the scandal between Xia Mian and Qin Anlin. In front of a hotel room in Hong Kong, Xia Mian and Qin Anlin stood side by side. Although they didn't do anything inappropriate, the sight of a man and a woman standing in front of a hotel room at midnight was enough to arouse people's imaginations. Yu Liangxiu stared at it for a long time before putting it down and starting the car. Qin Anlin came back on the 6th day of the new year. Xia Mian accompanied him, but as soon as they got off the plane, they were surrounded by reporters. Qin Anlin didn't take the same passage as Xia Mian. He left through the VIP passage. When Xia Mian was being interviewed by the reporters, her eyes were filled with tears. I think everyone knows that I was cheated by a scumbag. It was President Qin who comforted me and taught me a lot. Comforted? Taught her a lot? The reporters were imagining a drama. Did he comfort Xia Mian in the same room and teach her a lot? The reporters didn't let it go, but Xia Mian didn't say anything. She smiled and quickly left the airport. This kind of report was overwhelming the 8th day of the new year. In the top floor office of the ATV, Linda threw a newspaper on the floor and said angrily, Xia Mian is so shameless. She directed and acted on her own. She really didn't understand why Qin Anlin kept Xia Mian's bad hand. She didn't understand, but Yu Liangxiu did. Yu Liangxiu smiled faintly. Because he knows that I care about Xia Mian. If he wants to deal with me, of course he'll pick something that makes me uncomfortable and disturb my mind. Linda's neck shrank. He doesn't care about his reputation. When has President Qin ever cared about his reputation? Yu Liangxiu sighed. Only by letting Xia Mian create a scandal can she maintain a certain level of exposure. Also, Xia Mian probably needs to change her style. Look at her on the cover of the men's clothing issue. It's a big deal, Linda paused. Anyway, I hate this woman. Yu Liangxiu glanced at her. As long as President Qin doesn't hate it. These words are a bit sour. Linda thought immorally in her heart. However, Linda mentioned something else. Mr. Yi, President Su came to me a few days ago. Yu Liangxiu glanced at her. What? Linda pursed her lips. He asked me about your relationship with President Qin. I'll just tell you the truth. You're my personal secretary. There's nothing you can't say. Yu Liangxiu said indifferently. If I hide everything from you, then there's something wrong. Linda said, oh. Yu Liangxiu closed the document in front of her. King Entertainment is about to announce a full acquisition of ATV. Inform all the departments to be more cautious from today onwards. Especially any contact with King Entertainment, they have to go through me. Linda asked softly. What Mr. Yi means is that we can't let King Entertainment succeed. Of course. Yu Liangxiu stood up slowly. I'm the CEO of ATV. Linda nodded. Although she didn't know, she was on Mr. Ye's side. Whatever Mr. Yi said, she would do. At the beginning of the new year, King Entertainment began to completely ban ATV. Many of the artists who worked with ATV also backed out of their scheduled shows. ATV's purchase of broadcasting rights was also repeatedly blocked, and the resistance came from King Entertainment. Chapter 17:15. Ever since ATV had been acquired by King Entertainment, its shares had plummeted and everyone was in a state of panic. ATV was unprecedentedly tense and uneasy from top to bottom. The senior management who owned shares had begun to contact King Entertainment secretly, intending to sell their shares. They all had their own plans. Although Mr. Yi was capable, King Entertainment had first-hand resources. Many of the film and television productions were produced by King Entertainment. If they were to go head-to-head, Mr. Yi might not be their match. The storm lasted for more than a month. Even Su Shicheng had personally come to the company twice to express his condolences, but Yu Liangxiu had dismissed him on the grounds of fair competition. When Su Shicheng left, although he was unwilling, it wasn't wise to let him drag his injured body to take charge of the overall situation. ATV would only die faster. He was a little annoyed. He had seen ATV prosper before. How could it fail just like that? Su Shicheng left the office. Linda sent him off and came back. Mr. Yi, I secretly overheard Mr. Su talking to a few important shareholders just now. Those few said they wanted to replace Mr. Yi. They all thought that it was because of Mr. Yi that King Entertainment kept their eyes on ATV, Linda said carefully. Yu Liangxiu lowered her eyes. Then go and check the shares of those shareholders. Linda's eyes widened. She looked at Yu Liangxiu in disbelief. Mr. Yi means I think their shares have already been sold. Yu Liangxiu's tone was very calm. Once you found out, let Su Shicheng know. It's better for him to clean up the mess himself. Linda nodded. Okay. She went out for half an hour. When she came back, her expression was very ugly. Yu Liangxiu only needed to glance at her to know that she had guessed correctly. Sure enough, those people had sold their shares. They were forcing Su Shicheng to kick her out of the picture. This was probably Qin Anlin's idea, but she didn't understand. Was Qin Anlin unwilling to be her enemy, or was she a difficult opponent for him? She would rather believe the latter. Su Shicheng, on the other hand, was very fast. He quickly cleaned up the traitors. Not only that, Linda also explained in detail Su Shicheng's methods. Behind the scenes, those people did not have a good ending. This was his usual style, and Yu Liangxiu was not surprised. Of course, this also shocked the other shareholders who wanted to betray ATV. Those few people were a bloody example. Linda was a little scared. Mr. Yi, the CEO wasn't like this in the past. Yu Liangxiu knew what she was thinking. She smiled faintly and poured a glass of water for Linda. In the future, when Su Shicheng asks you about me, you just tell him. There's nothing he can't know. Linda held the glass of water and looked at Yu Liangxiu for a long time before nodding slightly. I hope you'll be fine. Yu Liangxiu still had a faint smile on her face, but there was a hint of loneliness in her smile, because there were too many people who had left her side. ATV, under the attack of King Entertainment, was in a precarious situation, and the entertainment industry was a place where people supported the strong and trampled on the weak. If things got worse, it would only get worse. In the end, it was to the point where ATV couldn't even hire celebrities, even if they spent money to shoot dramas. As for ATV, once its capital was exhausted, it could close down. Chapter 17:16. She wasn't a good drinker to begin with, but even with a good stomach, drinking like this would cause her to have problems sooner or later. That night, it was a dinner party with ATV's biggest partner. She wasn't feeling well, but she forced herself to come. Linda was quite angry. In the past, Mr. Yi wouldn't need to beg these people. Now, they were all good and bad, sponsoring the title sponsorship and asking Mr. Yi to endorse their products. Moreover, the other party was a bath brand under Procter & Gamble. Filming this kind of advertisement meant that they had to take off their clothes. As for how much they had to take off, it would depend on the effect. This is simply taking advantage of the situation. Linda and Yu Liangxiu walked out of the private room together. She supported Yu Liangxiu and said angrily, Mr. Yi, why did you agree to him? Yu Liangxiu's hand was on the wall. If the title sponsorship of ATV's ACE program doesn't renew the contract, it will be the last straw that breaks ATV's back. Linda understood. She just didn't want Mr. Yi to feel wronged. Mr. Yi. She still remembered watching Mr. Ye's movies before. They were so dazzling, but now he was bowing down to those people for ATV. Yi Liangxiu patted her hand. Go to the parking lot and drive the car to the entrance. I'm going to sober up. Linda was worried, but she looked again. Fortunately, Mr. Yi wasn't too drunk, so she left first. Linda left first. Yi Liangxiu leaned her back against the wall for a long time before she moved to the bathroom to wash her face with cold water. But just as she moved, her eyes froze. In front of her stood Qin Anlin, and of course, Xiao Mian. Qin Anlin was wearing a gray sweater, black trousers, and a coat on his arm. Although it was simple, he still looked outstanding. Xiao Mian was much cooler. She wore a black dress with a coat draped over her shoulders. Her brown curly hair was much more exquisite than before. Yi Liangxiu only took a glance and knew that the coat was from the brand she usually bought. She did not make a sound and only stared at them. Qin Anlin only paused for a moment, then walked over. He brushed past her. When he walked past her, she could feel the coldness from his body. When he walked past her, Xiao Mian gently placed her hand on Qin Anlin's arm. She then smiled sweetly and said, Mr. Yi, are you eating here too? Compared to her sweet and charming appearance, Yi Liangxiu was in a sorry state. He was wearing an ordinary turtleneck sweater, and his long hair was casually let down. His jacket was in his hands, and the smell of alcohol was overwhelming. He looked like a complete alcoholic. I'm done. Yi Liangxiu smiled faintly and waved her hand as if she didn't care too much. President Qin, goodbye. With that, she staggered in the bathroom, ignoring the two people she met by chance. Qin Anlin stopped walking. Xiao Mian looked up at him. President Qin, do you want to go see Mr. Yi? He smells of cigarettes. Did he get bullied? Qin Anlin's eyes fell on her face. His gaze was a bit sharp, and Xiao Mian did not dare to say anything. However, he walked straight to the bathroom and only said lightly to her, You go first. Xiao Mian smiled triumphantly. So what if President Qin went to see that woman now? President Qin would only hate Yi Liangxiu because of the smell of cigarettes and alcohol. She flipped her hair and pushed open the door of a private room. In the bathroom, Yi Liangxiu washed his face and felt that his head was much clearer. Chapter 17:17. As soon as she looked up, she saw Qin Anlin in the mirror. She paused and sneered. Is President Qin here to see me make a fool of myself? Qin Anlin's body leaned against the wall of the bathroom, and his voice was indifferent. I thought Mr. Yi hadn't reached that point yet. Yi Liangxiu smiled faintly. She turned around, leaned her back against the sink, and looked at him. Then how miserable does President Qin think I should be miserable? He moved forward, one leg stuck between her body, and his slender body also leaned forward. Such a posture was very shameful. He lifted her chin with a finger, and his gaze was slightly cold. When the ATV can't be saved, and you're like a stray dog. She lifted her chin along with his strength, and her long black hair spread out behind her. She looked extremely heroic, but because of the alcohol, she looked particularly charming and moving. President Qin thinks that I will have such a day. She smiled lightly, then wrapped her hands around his neck and exhaled. As long as Su Shicheng doesn't let go, I think even if thousands of ATV employees lose their jobs, President Qin probably won't be able to get the ATV. In the face of her teasing, Qin Anlin was unmoved. He stood straight and looked at her coldly. I don't think Mr. Yi will sit back and do nothing. She smiled lightly and tilted her head. Don't you think too highly of me, President Qin? I'm not that great. He still looked at her coldly and didn't speak again. Instead, he removed her arms from his neck and said in an almost insulting tone, Mr. Yi, please behave yourself. A body that has been slept with thousands of times is not that attractive to me. He took a step back, his attitude cold. Her gaze fell on something, and she still smiled lightly. Is President Qin used to saying one thing and thinking another? Then she shrugged. Or is it because of Xiao Mian? CEO Qin is infatuated with her body? Qin Anlin pinches her chin. Yi Liangxiu, I don't mind letting you know whether I dare to sleep with her or not. Sleep. She smiled. I also want to test if other men are interested in my body. His gaze instantly turned cold as he forcefully released her chin. Immediately, 5 finger marks appeared on her chin. His voice was as cold as ice beads. Yiliangxiu, I don't mind letting you know the consequences. What consequences can there be? She said self-deprecatingly. The worst outcome is divorce, isn't it, Qin Anlin? She looked straight into his eyes. Since you're going to do it, be more ruthless. He looked at her deeply. This is the Yi Liangxiu you mentioned. She grunted and then stood up straight. She touched her forehead with her slender fingers and smiled. Yes. She walked forward with her back straight, and her voice couldn't be clearer. Qin Anlin, I'm a little tired of this kind of mutual harm. Her arm was caught by him. She turned her head and looked at the coldness on his face. She was still smiling. Yiliangxiu, you can also quit. He gave in and gave up the biggest step in Qin Anlin's life. Leave the Su family, leave ATV, and let's be together. She was obviously startled for a moment. When he said together, he meant together. Was it the same as before? Chapter 17-18. She still had to walk the path that she was supposed to walk. She didn't know the outcome, but she would have a clear conscience. She had to get rid of Su Shicheng with her own hands so that they wouldn't face each other and that secret wouldn't surface. She looked down and smiled. Anlin, I don't want to force myself to be your accessory. Also, my surname is Su and yours is Qin. You know that. With that, she broke free from his hand and walked towards the entrance of the hotel. As she walked, she laughed so hard that tears rolled down her cheeks. She would rather he be cruel to her, and she would rather it end sooner. She was afraid that she wouldn't be able to withstand his hatred. She was really afraid. Qin Anlin looked at her back and slowly clenched his fingers into fists. His knuckles turned white from force. When he walked into the private room, Xiao Mian served the investors very well. She was no longer the Xiao Mian she used to be. After what happened with Che Taixian, she couldn't walk the path of a pure and innocent girl anymore, so she simply followed the rules of the entertainment industry. When Qin Anlin walked in, a director of a film and television company greeted him with a glass of wine. President Qin, you're late. You have to drink 3 glasses as a punishment. Qin Anlin was troubled, but he still took the glass and drank 3 glasses in a row. The spicy taste entered his throat, and his Adam's apple moved slightly. It was very tempting. Xiao Mian watched him drink 3 glasses and immediately handed him a tissue. President Qin, wipe yourself. Qin Anlin didn't refuse and casually wiped himself. In fact, tonight was also a men's party, but one of them had taken a fancy to Xiao Mian, so he brought her here. As for whether Xiao Mian was willing, it was up to her. He wouldn't force her. After sitting down, Xiao Mian poured him a glass of red wine and said gently, How did your talk with Mr. Yi go? Qin Anlin glanced at Xiao Mian and didn't say anything. The others were all experienced people. How could they not know that Qin Anlin was displeased? They were curious as to how a woman like Xiao Mian, who had poked President Qin's sore spot, managed to survive in King Entertainment to this day. Maybe the rumors were true. Xiao Mian looked a bit like Yi Liangxiu. Since President Qin and Mr. Yi had a falling out, it was a good idea to have Xiao Mian by his side. The man who had asked for Xiao Mian was a little hesitant. After all, he didn't know what President Qin was thinking. If there was something going on between President Qin and Xiao Mian, wouldn't he offend President Qin by taking advantage of her? Therefore, during the banquet, Qin Anlin only said a few words indifferently. It's fine. This was enough to show his stance. President Ding was immediately overjoyed. He repeatedly toasted Xiao Mian and made her drink several times. Xiao Mian was in a good mood and came here with Qin Anlin, so she didn't think too much about it. During the banquet, she couldn't hold back and said that Yi Liangxiu had accepted a role in a P&G commercial. Other people would feel embarrassed, but Xiao Mian really didn't know what to do. If President Qin didn't care, he would have left a long time ago. President Qin wanted to deal with ATV and Su Shicheng, not Yi Liangxiu. What man would want his wife to take off her clothes and shoot a commercial like that? No matter how elegant the commercial was, it was still going to be naked. Men would care and go crazy. Besides, Mr. Yi, Queen Yi, which man hadn't thought of her as a goddess? Chapter 17-19. The activity in the private room went on for 2 to 3 hours. Most of the men in the room would talk vulgarly. Xiao Mian had gotten used to it. She quietly played with her phone. Occasionally, President Ding would call her over for a drink. After drinking too much, Xiao Mian was a little tipsy. She wanted to leave, but she didn't want to give up such an opportunity. Maybe when she left, President Qin would send her back. Such opportunities were rare. Therefore, she held on until the end of the dinner. But in the end, she couldn't take it anymore. She was 80 to 90% drunk. She didn't even know that Qin Amlin had left. When Xiao Mian woke up, she was on the bed in the hotel room. She was only wrapped in a sheet. Her female instincts told her that she had slept with a man. She opened her eyes and closed them again. Feeling the vague sense of fullness, the corners of her mouth slightly curved up. She smelled the refreshing scent of a man. Then, her lips were kissed, President Qin. She was elated and shy. Closing her eyes, she accepted the man's kiss and murmured. But the gentle love she imagined didn't happen. Then, the man slapped her mercilessly. Bitch! This voice? Xiao Mian opened her eyes and looked at the man in front of her in surprise. It wasn't President Qin, she knew him. People called him President Ding. Why was she in his bed? Xiao Mian suddenly wrapped herself in the sheet. Her eyes were full of tears as she stared at President Ding. Her lips were slightly trembling. President Ding was in his 40s. He was actually quite good-looking. His favorite thing to do was to play with celebrities. But he knew which celebrities he could play with and which ones he couldn't. Xiao Mian, for example, looked like a virtuous girl, but after watching the video with Che Tai-Hsien, she was nothing but a prostitute in his eyes. Since she was a prostitute, she could sleep with him as long as he spent money. President Ding was quite strong. He only had a bath towel around his body. Seeing Xiao Mian's reluctance, he straightened up and grabbed a pack of cigarettes from the bedside table. He pulled out a cigarette, put it between his lips, lit it, and took a long drag. Then, he looked at Xiao Mian and sneered, "I've slept with you twice." He was quite satisfied with her body. After all, Xiao Mian was young and hadn't slept with many men, so she was relatively clean. Besides, it was thrilling to play with a female star, so it didn't matter if he spent a lot of money. Xiao Mian's lips trembled even more. She buried her head in her knees and didn't speak. Seeing her like this, President Ding was a little unhappy. With a cold face, he said, "Do you still think that you can climb into President Qin's bed?" Xiao Mian pursed her lips, and the color of her lips turned even paler. "If President Qin was interested in you, you wouldn't be in my bed." CEO Ding was expressionless. "Tell me, what do you want before you sleep with me?" CEO Ding was a businessman and a northerner. He was very crude and did not have much literary talent. Thus, he spoke very rudely about such things. Xiao Mian couldn't stand it. Tears welled up in her eyes. CEO Ding found her annoying. Wasn't it normal for a female star to sleep with a man? What was the point of making her chastity so obvious? But men often had a deep-rooted bad habit. The harder it was to get a woman, the more they wanted her. Just like now, CEO Ding turned around and wrote a few checks. He threw one in front of Xiao Mian. 1 million. Xiao Mian didn't say anything. 2 million. Another check was thrown. Chapter 17-20. President Ding threw down all the checks in his hand. 10 million. Do you want to sell it? 10 million. Xiao Mian looked at the checks. 10 million was enough for her to buy a house in B City. She hesitated. President Ding sneered, knowing that she was willing to sell it. He pinched her chin and slowly moved his hand up, squeezing her lips. He stood on the bed, and she knelt on the bed with the checks under her knees. It was as if she was kneeling on the money, humiliated, but also greedy and eager. "Serve me here, and I'll add another 5 million. His rough fingers touched her rosy lips, and his voice was hoarse. Xiao Mian carefully moved over, her fingers lightly. President Ding sneered. He had never failed to take down a female star. He could sleep with whoever he wanted. Of course, he did think about Yi Liangxiu, but it was just a thought. It wasn't entirely because of President Qin, but because Yi Liangxiu gave him the feeling that she was like the bright moon. He could only admire her from afar. Xiao Mian served him well, and he was satisfied. After they were done, he gave her another 5 million. President Ding put on a pair of pants and left without hesitation, leaving Xiao Mian and the 15 million behind. Xiao Mian went to the bathroom and frantically rinsed herself. She could accept that time with Che Taixian was for the role. But this time, she was completely selling her body. She desperately rinsed herself, but couldn't wash herself clean. She came out in a bathrobe, and there were checks scattered on the bed, with President Ding's smell on them. Disgusted, she picked up the checks and wanted to tear them up, but she couldn't bear to do it. She had worked so hard to get this money. Late at night, Xiao Mian walked out of the hotel with trembling legs. President Ding was tough, and every time he took her, she felt as if a stake had been nailed into her body. It hurt, but it was even more humiliating. Xiao Mian didn't call her assistant. Instead, she flagged down a taxi. When the driver asked her where she was going, she unconsciously told him Qin Amlin's address. After saying it, she was in a trance, and after a while, she felt bored. But the car had already left, so she didn't stop him. She just looked out the window with her chin on her hand. When the car arrived, Xiao Mian paid the driver and got out. She stood in front of the mansion and looked at the tall building in the dark night. In the past, she could almost come in and out of this place. She believed that if Yi Liangxiu didn't come back, she could enter Qin Amlin's heart. However, Yi Liangxiu came back, and she was struck out so quickly. She really wanted to ask Qin Amlin why. Why did he send her to someone else's bed? Xiao Mian leaned against the cold wall. With a cigarette dangling from her lips, she dialed Qin Amlin's number with the other hand. She knew that he had insomnia. It was Qingxiu who told her that he was still awake at this hour. The call was picked up by him personally. She should be thankful that Yi Liangxiu wasn't asleep on his body. Xiao Mian's voice was a little shrill. Why did you do this? Qin Amlin was indeed awake. He was standing on the balcony of his bedroom, looking at a small dot downstairs with a blank expression on his face. It was Xiao Mian, who was sitting awkwardly on the ground. He knew in his heart that Xiao Mian had slept with President Ding. Since she had slept with him, what was the point of being downstairs now? Pay attention to your identity and your location. His voice was cold, and he was about to hang up the phone. Chapter 17:21. When Qin Amlin heard this, a mocking smile appeared on his face. He said slowly, Xiao Mian, you don't like me. You like power. Xiao Mian's phone slipped from her hand. Power? Perhaps it was. From the first time she saw him, she had fallen for him. But he didn't want her. He didn't want her. No matter what Yi Liangxiu did or how bad she was, he couldn't leave her. Yes, he loved that bitch. He loved her to death. Xiao Mian got up from the ground and walked to the road in a daze. Cars flew past her one after another, and the white lights were so bright that she couldn't open her eyes. But Xiao Mian didn't seem to feel it and continued to walk forward like a ghost. She kept murmuring, I thought too much. I thought too much. Qin Amlin stood on the balcony and looked at Xiao Mian, his lips pursed into a straight line. He knew very well that Xiao Mian couldn't be helped. Her self-control was too weak, and her personal charm wasn't enough to reach the top. And he hadn't given up on her, probably because she was a little like Liangxiu. After watching for a while, he went back to the bedroom. Lying on the bed, he unlocked his phone and looked at the photos on it. It was a photo of him and Liangxiu in the past. Do you know you're very hateful? He said softly as his fingers fell on her face. But no matter how much he said, she couldn't hear him. Did she think he was dead when she wanted to shoot that kind of commercial? Of course he knew that she was forced into a dead end. However, they had the rules of the game, and she had broken them. It was a new week. Yi Liangxiu sat in her office and looked at the report on the table. Linda stood to the side and didn't dare to make a sound. Yi Liangxiu looked up and said calmly, How long can the series we bought last? Less than 2 months. Linda sighed. Mr. Yi, the director of King Entertainment, has an appointment this afternoon. Do you want to meet him? Is there anything important? Yi Lianxio's tone was particularly indifferent. She looked down at the report again. Linda hesitated again and again before saying softly, "He said he's here to discuss the acquisition." Yi Lianxio puts her hand on the table. The sound is not low. Linda is startled and does not dare to say anything. After a long time, he heard Yi Lianxio's voice. "Let's make an appointment. I also want to meet President Qin." Linda nodded. "I will arrange it." Seeing that Mr. Yi was in a bad mood, she didn't dare to disturb him. She went out and closed the door. After she left, Yi Lianxio looked up, her brows furrowed slightly. Qin Anlin had already closed the net on ATV, and it seemed that it was time for her to fight to the death. Although it was risky, as long as there was a 50% chance, she would try. At 3:00 in the afternoon, Yi Lianxio met Qin Anlin in the reception room. Other than Linda and Kaim, there was no one else. The atmosphere did not relax in the slightest because of the small number of people. Instead, it was very tense. Qin Anlin directly threw out a document. "This is the 25% of the shares I have collected. I think if there is another 20%, ATV will become the object of King Entertainment." Yi Lianxio looked down and smiled faintly. Isn't it too easy for President Qin? Chapter 17:22. So, is this 25% enough to influence ATV's decision? Qin Anlin's voice was still cold. "For example, Mr. Yi wants to personally shoot a commercial. I think it will damage the company's image." Yi Lianxio smiled. "If President Qin wants to replace me as the CEO, he probably has to listen to Mr. Su. After all, he is the largest shareholder, and President Qin's main purpose today is to acquire. I think it's better to talk to Mr. Su directly." Qin Anlin's eyes were burning. "I know Mr. Yi has a way, but I won't help you." Yi Lianxio's expression was cold and indifferent. "I'm the CEO of ATV, and I will be loyal to the company." Qin Anlin sneered. "Then, you will make thousands of people in ATV pay a painful price. The person who will cause the harm is you." Yi Lianxio sneered. "Since President Qin wants to do it, why pretend to be benevolent? I don't remember you being so soft-hearted before." He narrowed his eyes and glared at her. "President Qin, I advise you to be calm." She leaned over and said softly, "If you're not afraid of causing a bad impact, you could buy it by force, but I'm afraid that the ATV you buy will be worthless." He also stared into her eyes, and his voice was tense. "You don't care?" Yi Lianxio smiled softly. "What do I care? President Qin, what I want has always been the same as what you want." She was no longer short of money, wasn't she? Qin Anlin narrowed his eyes and looked at her, then pursed his lips and didn't say anything else. The negotiation had broken down. She still had to stand on ATV's side, or rather, on Su Shurqing's side. Qin Anlin didn't force her, which was expected. However, he was still a little sad in his heart. He still wasn't used to it, or he still couldn't accept such a fact. He leaned against the car door and smoked. Kaim sat quietly in the car, waiting for him. Kaim knew very well that President Qin had already shown mercy. If he hadn't shown mercy, he might have used unscrupulous means to suppress them. He rolled down the window, and Qin Anlin handed him a cigarette. Kaim took it and lit it. He puffed out a smoke ring and said softly, "Kaim, you've seen everything." Kaim couldn't say anything. After all, it was Boss Qin's family business. Qin Anlin cursed under his breath, opened the door, and got on the car. As soon as the black RV drove away, 2 more RVs drove over and stopped at the original spot. The car door opened, and Xing got off first. He welcomed Su Shurqing carefully. Su Shurqing leaned on his crutches and looked at the ATV building. He sighed softly. Things are different now. Xing supported him and said softly, "Mr. Su, Xing doesn't know about these, but Xing will protect you well." Su Shurqing forced a smile. "Yeah, why am I telling you this? You don't know anyway." After he finished speaking, he looked at Xing meaningfully and spoke more slowly. "Xing, you seem to be quite happy today." Xing was stunned. After a while, Xing said, "Xing is happy to be with Mr. Su every day. You're getting better at talking. This isn't like you. You're not being honest." Su Shirching glanced at him, but he didn't make things difficult for him. Xing secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Chapter 17:23. Xing's face was a little red. He restrained himself for a long time. When Su Shircheng arrived at Yi Liangqiu's office, Yi Liangqiu and Linda were in the middle of handing over some matters. The door was not closed. Su Shircheng stood at the door and listened for a while. Although he was anxious, he was still comforted. This girl always had ATV in her heart. She did not betray Qin Anlin. It seemed that ambition needed time. Su Shircheng thought silently. His daughter would not be satisfied with mediocrity. It was right for Liangqiu to be like this. Su Shircheng coughed lightly and walked in slowly. Yi Liangqiu and Linda's conversation stopped abruptly. She looked at Su Shircheng in surprise. After a long time, she came back to her senses and called him CEO. You sound so distant. Su Shircheng walked to the sofa and sat down. He signaled with his eyes, and Xing walked out. Yi Liangqiu looked at Linda. Go make a cup of tea for Mr. Su. Linda nodded and went to get a cup. When she was making tea, there was a little white powder in her hands. Her hands were trembling, and her gaze was a little blank. She knew what this meant. It meant that she had completely betrayed Mr. Su. If she was found out, she would die a horrible death. Linda was also hesitant, but in the end, she still chose to betray. With trembling hands, she poured the powder and mixed it evenly. When she carried it out, Linda had already put on a proper smile. She half knelt down to serve Su Shircheng the tea. I know that CEO likes to Hong Pao. Mr. Yu specially kept it as a premium product. Su Shircheng was quite satisfied. He looked at Yi Liangqiu. That's very thoughtful. As long as Dad likes it. Yi Liangqiu smiled and took a sip from her cup. Su Shircheng also took a sip. The taste was indeed his favorite, but tasting tea was not his main goal. He was concerned about the future of ATV. Do you have any countermeasures for the acquisition of King Entertainment? He tapped his finger on the cup, and his eyes were like torches. Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips. If I say there is, will Dad believe me? Su Shircheng chuckled. Of course I believe you. He looked straight at her as if he wanted to see through her soul. Liangqiu, tell me your plan. Yi Liangqiu looked around and smiled. It's not the right time yet. She looked at Su Shircheng and tried to stall for time with him, waiting for the medicine to take effect. Sure enough, after chatting for 5 minutes, Su Shircheng couldn't take it anymore and slowly tilted his head. Yi Liangqiu lifted her chin slightly and looked at Linda. She said softly, call Xing over. Linda's heart was beating fast. She had never done such a thing before. Moreover, the one who fell was Su Shircheng. She nodded and walked out without stopping to call Xing in. When Xing came in, his face was still slightly red. But when he saw Su Shircheng's head tilted to one side, he got a shock. He looked at Yi Liangqiu in fear. Xing was not a fool. Although he was a dutiful person, he heard from others that Sir and Missy did not get along. And now, Sir had collapsed. Could it be Missy's doing? His heart was beating like thunder. There were already 100 thoughts in his mind. Yi Liangqiu looked at him and said calmly, carry Sir to the resting room inside. Sir is a little tired and has fallen asleep. She then told Linda, call a doctor over to take a look at Sir. Linda nodded and went out first. Only Xing, Yi Liangqiu, and the sleeping Su Shircheng were left at the scene. Xing was in a battle with heaven. He was sure that Sir would not collapse for no reason. It must be Missy's doing. Chapter 17:24. His breathing was a little hot. He stared at Yi Liangqiu with a burning gaze. Yi Liangqiu got up and walked to Xing. She placed her hand on his shoulder gently. Xing, what's wrong? Why aren't you carrying Sir in? Xing panted slightly and looked at her hesitantly. Yi Liangqiu smiled. He's just asleep. He'll be fine. Xing felt more at ease. He was stunned for a while before he carried Su Shircheng. Su Shircheng had lost a lot of weight over the past year. He looked like an empty shell. Xing was 8 meters tall, and it was effortless for him to carry Su Shircheng. He bent down and placed Su Shircheng down carefully. After all, he had always been in awe of Su Shircheng. Even though Su Shircheng was unconscious, Xing still did not dare to act rashly. However, when he turned around, he almost bumped into Liangxiu, who was behind him. His lips brushed against her hair, and he could only smell her fragrance. Therefore, Xing's mind uncontrollably recalled the dream that he had every night. His face was buried in Missy's long hair, and he smelled the same fragrance. His face was very red, his breathing was messy, and he did not know where to put his hands and feet. Liangxiu had been waiting for this moment for a long time. She used the ATV's low status to exchange for such an opportunity. Xing was the only breakthrough. Mr. Su will wake up in 2 hours. I will say that he suddenly fainted because his blood sugar level is too low. Liangxiu said faintly. The doctor will say the same thing too. Xing pursed his lips and hesitated for a while before asking, Missy, why did you treat Mr. Su like this? Why? Liangxiu looked at Xing with a gentle gaze. Xing, do you want to know? Xing nodded vigorously. He suddenly realized something and shook his head vigorously. Missy, please don't make things difficult for me. Xing is only responsible for protecting Mr. Su. Today's incident is over. His voice became very soft as he was troubled. How could Liangxiu not know the struggle in his heart? Xing was honest and stubborn. She smiled and suddenly reached out to hold his hand. What if I want to make things difficult for you? After he finished speaking, he stared at Xing. Xing was at a loss again. He stuttered for a long time before he squeezed out a sentence. Eldest Miss. Liangxiu chuckled. Don't call me young Mississippi. Just call me Liangxiu. I don't dare. Xing lowered his head and spoke in a hoarse voice. Liangxiu watched as his face turned red all the way to his collar. His entire body was probably as red as a shrimp. She leaned closer and said in a low voice, You even dare to have that kind of dream. What else do you not dare to do? The moment she said this, Xing's eyes widened and he stuttered, Miss, how did you know? Liangxiu smiled faintly. Now let me ask you, where is Qin Pei? Once she knew Qin Pei's whereabouts, Su Shiqing would not need to stay in this world anymore. Xing's face was pale. He stared at Liangxiu's face and understood that he was dreaming. He thought that Missy had feelings for him. It turned out that Missy was thinking about that matter. He was not clear about that matter. He had only heard about it from others after struggling for a long time. He said softly, Mr. Su did not mention about that matter. Chapter 1725. Xing's eyes lit up and dimmed after a while. He asked softly, Can I really do it? Liangxiu smiled faintly. Of course. It just depends on whether you want to or not. Xing hesitated for a while and looked straight at Liangxiu. He said slowly, I'm willing to work for Elder Mississippi. After he said that, he broke out in cold sweat, and so did his palms. Liangxiu was still smiling. All right. Xing, you're very smart. You should know what to do. Xing's face turned red. He looked at Su Shiqing, who was sleeping soundly, and replied, Liangxiu patted him. Then you'll look after Mr. Su now. Her words seemed to have given Xing a sacred mission. Xing's face was radiating an unprecedented spirit. After Liangxiu finished speaking, she walked back to her seat and continued to read the documents. She was also waiting for Su Shiqing to wake up. Of course, she could kill Su Shiqing now. But firstly, she had no way to escape. Secondly, Qin Pei would most probably die. Su Shiqing held onto the documents for about 1.5 hours before he woke up. The moment he opened his old eyes, he looked around sharply. His expression was also somewhat guarded. Sir, you're awake. Xing went forward and helped Su Shiqing up. You suddenly fainted just now. Elder Miss has looked for a doctor. Su Shiqing put on his shoes and squinted his eyes. What did the doctor say? Xing looked at Su Shiqing sincerely and said, The doctor said that I'm old and my blood sugar is on the low side. Then, Xing said more sincerely, Sir, Elder Miss is still very concerned about you. Xing can tell. These words dispelled Su Shiqing's doubts. He smiled faintly. That's true. After all, we're father and daughter. We're different from others. He looked around and realized that it was the lounge in Lianchio's office. He asked Xing to help him out. When he walked out, he saw Lianchio sitting behind the desk and flipping through the documents. She looked a little tired. Su Shicheng coughed softly. "Dad, you're awake." Lianchio raised her eyes and looked at Su Shicheng. She immediately stood up and walked over, helping him to sit on the sofa. Su Shicheng's heart was also somewhat comforted. He waved his hand and said, "Go on with your work." Lianchio looked at him and didn't speak for a long time. After a long time, she said quietly, "Dad, don't worry about the company. I'll take care of it." Su Shicheng patted her hand. "If it was someone else, I would naturally believe in your ability. But it is Qin Anlin. How can I rest assured?" Moreover, although ATV couldn't compare to King Entertainment in terms of resources, it was still beyond his expectations that they could not withstand a single blow. Back then, the scandal between him and Su Cheng had severely damaged the vitality of ATV. Otherwise, he would have personally come forward. Thinking of this, Su Shicheng felt a little upset. "Lianchio, it's been hard on you." Then, he gave Xing a look and said, "Go out for a while. I have something to discuss with Missy." Xing glanced at Lianchio, then left and closed the door. When there was only Su Shicheng and Lianchio left, Su Shicheng was obviously not as calm. His tone was a little anxious. "How are you and Qin Anlin recently?" Lianchio smiled faintly. "You've seen it too. ATV's situation is my current situation." Chapter 17:26. Lianchio interrupted him. "Dad, only the shares and management rights of ATV can appease his anger. You should know this better than me." Su Shicheng was dispirited at the mention of this. He looked at Lianchio and said slowly, "Whether you believe it or not, this is the most regretful thing I've ever done." Until today, he would dream of Hong looking at him with tears in her eyes. She would call him Shicheng and say that he had made her suffer a lot. When he woke up from the dream, he was covered in cold sweat. He did not dare to tell anyone about this dream. He never dared to. Lianchio smiled faintly. "Dad, these are not important. The important thing is..." She looked at him. "Dad, have you ever heard of the phrase retreat in order to advance?" "Retreat in order to advance?" Su Shicheng chewed on this phrase and looked at her with a burning gaze. Lianchio smiled faintly. "Yes, retreat in order to advance." Su Shicheng did not say anything but looked at her quietly. She leaned over and whispered a few words. There was a strange look in Su Shicheng's eyes. There was doubt, but also doubt. Lianchio still smiled faintly. "Of course, Dad. You can choose not to believe me. After all, we used to be enemies. But now I have no way out, don't I?" Su Shicheng looked at her for a long time before he nodded. "Let me think about it." Lianchio poured a cup of tea for herself. "Of course." Su Shicheng's gaze fell on her face. After a long time, he got up and called out, "Xing." Xing came in and knew that it was time to leave. He quickly helped Su Shicheng up. Before Su Shicheng left, he repeated again, "I'll think about it carefully." Lianchio nodded and suddenly changed the topic. "I'll accompany Dad to the hospital for a checkup one day later." Su Shicheng was stunned for a moment and waved his hand. "You could just focus on your work. Xing will accompany me." As he spoke, he walked out. Lianchio looked at him from behind. He was no different from an ordinary old man. But she knew that Su Shicheng was Su Shicheng. If he didn't die, he would still be ruthless. Su Shicheng and Xing went out and sat in the car. Xing drove the car. At first, Su Shicheng closed his eyes slightly. Then, he suddenly lifted his eyelids and asked casually, "Missy wants me to transfer the shares of ATV to her. What do you think, Xing?" Xing paused for a while and laughed dryly. Xing doesn't know about these things. "Mister, please make the decision." Su Shicheng chuckled. "Yeah, you don't understand." Xing, "Look, I don't even have anyone to talk to now." After saying that, he sighed softly. "I'm old, and there are many things that I can't do. I'm not as bold as I used to be when making decisions. It's time for me to retire." Xing quickly said, "Mister is still young, it's still early." Su Shicheng laughed again. "Only you know how to coax an old man like me." He paused for a while. Actually, I'm not afraid. Liangxiu still has her scruples. As he spoke, Xing's palms were sweating. He didn't say anything for a long time, as he was afraid that he would expose himself if he opened his mouth. Once they returned to the villa, Su Shicheng said lightly, Xing, from now on, you'll have to work for me honestly. You'll definitely benefit from it. Missy will definitely divorce Qin Anlin in the future. I like you very much. Xing was stunned when he heard that. He waved his hands desperately. Mister, I don't dare to. Xing doesn't deserve Missy. Chapter 17:27. Xing's palms were full of sweat. So was his forehead. The sweat was as big as beans and dripped down like rain. After a long while, he said dryly, Sir, you only know how to tease Xing. Su Shicheng smiled again and patted Xing's shoulder. There's something I need your help with. You're the only person I can trust by my side now. That gentle pat on the shoulder made Xing feel flattered and fearful. He stuttered and said, As long as Xing can do it, I will do it for you. Su Shicheng looked at Xing and smiled. I know you're loyal, but I think if you become my son-in-law, I will trust you more. Xing didn't understand his words. He didn't dare to hope for Missy. He only felt that Sir was testing him or joking with him. But Su Shicheng continued, There's an opportunity now. It depends on you if you're willing to grasp it. He called Xing over and whispered a few words in his ear. Xing was stunned. He didn't come back to his senses for a long while. Then, he looked at Su Shicheng blankly. Xing was shocked. He was so shocked that he peed his pants. When he turned around, he shook his head. Xing doesn't dare. As long as you dare to think and do it, there's nothing you don't dare to do. Su Shicheng's voice was cold. Xing, your loyalty depends on your performance. More sweat appeared on Xing's forehead. The beads dripped down one by one. He didn't dare to make a sound. Su Shicheng's voice was gentle. We'll talk about it in the future. He was too profound. Xing couldn't understand his intentions and didn't dare to ask. But Xing quickly understood what he meant. A week later, it was a Saturday night. Su Shicheng returned to the Su residence. Yi Liangxiu and Momo were having dinner. Momo was already 1 year old. His teeth were almost fully grown, and he could eat liquid food. Yi Liangxiu would personally cook some baby meals for him no matter how busy she was. He had already lost a lot of childhood happiness with her. She would try her best to do whatever she could. When Su Shicheng appeared, Yi Liangxiu was obviously stunned. Then, she said softly, Dad, you're here. He raised his voice and asked the servants to bring another set of chopsticks and bowls. Let's eat together. Su Shicheng sat down and hugged it. He played with it for a while before handing it back to the housekeeper. I've eaten. Go make a cup of tea for Sir. Yi Liangxiu whispered to the servant beside her. Don't put too many tea leaves. Su Shicheng also got up. I'll go upstairs and rest for a while. Yi Liangxiu nodded. Su Shicheng looked at Xing and said in a hoarse voice, Help me up. Xing nodded his head and supported him into the hall. Then, they slowly went upstairs. Yi Liangxiu watched with a burning gaze. After a while, she whispered to the nanny, Look after the young master. Alone, Ji Yunshu quietly followed him. In the master bedroom on the second floor, Su Shicheng did not lie down after entering. Instead, he gently turned on a switch. When an entire wall was moved away, Xing was shocked. He turned his head and looked at Su Shicheng. Sir, accompany me in. Su Shicheng's voice was a little hoarse and stern. He was probably going to see an old friend. Xing responded with an "Oh," and supported Su Shicheng as they walked in the dark secret tunnel. His heart was beating very fast, thumping, thumping, thumping. His palms were also sweaty. Under the dim light, Su Shicheng's voice was heard. Xing, are you nervous? No. Xing was not very natural. His voice was also hoarse. It's a little gloomy here. Chapter 17:28. When Su Shicheng heard this, he chuckled softly. His laughter echoed through the long corridor, making his hair stand on end. Xing's hair stood on end. I'll bring you to meet someone. Someone that Missy has always wanted to meet. Su Shicheng broke away from Xing and walked quickly. He did not look like someone who had walked past the gates of hell. He seemed to have become 10 years younger in an instant. Ah Xing was stunned. He stopped in his tracks and felt that something was wrong. But he had no choice. Su Shirqing's voice was calm. Ah Xing, didn't you always want to know my secret on behalf of Missy? Now that I brought you here, you should be happy. As he spoke, Su Shirqing turned around. The light shone on his back and cast a deep shadow on his haggard face. He looked like a ghost. Behind him, there were a few lights and a huge wooden prison. There was a person locked inside. That person had no legs and was just sitting. His long hair was scattered all over his body. It was hard to tell if he was a man or a woman. Ah Xing looked at him. His lips moved and his legs felt weak. At this moment, he instinctively knew that Su Shirqiang had been suspicious of him. Ah Xing, do you know what made me suspicious? Su Shirqiang laughed softly. You used Missy's photo in your phone. Ah Xing's forehead was full of sweat, but he still pretended to be calm. Missy is the Empress. I admire her. Admire her. Su Shirqiang walked one round around Ah Xing and stopped in front of him. His eyes were like torches. Then why did you help Missy to lie to me? Ah Xing blurted out, Mr. did faint that day. But just as he finished his sentence, his face turned pale. Then he knelt down. Mr. Su, a black gun barrel was pressed against his forehead. He looked up and cold sweat was dripping down. Drop by drop, the cold sweat fell on the cold ground. Very soon, the place became even colder. Unknowingly, there were 4 men in black standing beside Su Shirqing. All of them looked cold. Su Shirqing bent down and patted Ah Xing's face lightly. Ah Xing, you have disappointed me. Ah Xing knelt down and did not even pant. Su Shirqiang sighed softly. It seems that Liangqiu values you too much. A silly child like you is so honest that you can be tricked easily. Ah Xing's body trembled twice. He raised his eyes and stared at Su Shirqing. He suddenly pleaded loudly. It's Ah Xing's fault. It's Ah Xing's fault. Ah Xing only cares about eldest Mississippi. It was Ah Xing who used Sir's matter to encourage eldest Mississippi. This matter has nothing to do with eldest Mississippi. Su Shirqing looked at him and chuckled. You're quite loyal. Since you're so devoted to Liangqiu, I'll give you a chance. Su Shirqiang smiled sinisterly. Ah Xing, your Missy is at the door now. Go and catch her. Fear appeared on Ah Xing's face. He turned around abruptly and saw Yu Liangqiu holding onto the wall at the entrance. She seemed to be trying to escape. But how could Su Shirqiang let her escape? He gently pressed a button, and the wall at the entrance slowly closed up. The cold basement was quiet. It was so quiet that it was scary. Now that you know my secret, what do you want to do? Su Shirqiang sat on a wooden chair with a relaxed expression. Yu Liangqiu stood there for a long time. She knew that she couldn't escape. She decided to get down slowly and walk to the front of Su Shirqiang. Have you been pretending all along? Chapter 1729. Su Shirqing's expression was indifferent. He glanced at Ah Xing, who was kneeling at the side. Missy is here now. You like her, and she tried to seduce you to work for her. Now, I'm giving you a chance to make her yours. Ah Xing shook his head vigorously. Ah Xing doesn't dare to. Mister, Ah Xing is a boorish man. He's not worthy. Su Shirqing's gaze was sharp. He stood up slowly and snatched the gun from his underling. He used the butt of the gun to smash Ah Xing's head. Useless. You can't even handle a woman. Ah Xing fell to the ground. There was a trickle of blood on his forehead. He used all his strength to look at Yu Liangqiu. Yu Liangqiu's face was expressionless. Su Shirqing's gaze alternated between their faces. He then sneered. Did you see that? You wholeheartedly helped her, but she didn't even plead for you. Ah Xing was still lying on the ground. He didn't dare to move. His voice was weak and weak. Ah Xing doesn't dare to have such thoughts towards Missy. Su Shirqing looked up, and his underling immediately stepped on Ah Xing's head. Su Shirqing's voice was deep and slow. There was no emotion in it. You have 2 choices now. One is to have sex with your Missy. The other is for your Missy to have sex with someone else. He looked around. You're not the only man here. Ah Xing was stunned. His head was stepped on, and his teeth were red. Blood slowly flowed out from the corner of his mouth and dyed the cold ground red. He tilted his gaze and struggled with his fingers on the ground. Every time he struggled, the underling would step on him harder, but he still moved bit by bit. Finally, he held on to Su Shirching's leg and tightened his grip. "Missy, is your daughter?" Yi Liangqiu's body tensed up. She didn't say a word because she knew that once she opened her mouth, Xing would become her weakness. Xing's ending would be even worse. She felt guilty, but there was no turning back. She could only look at him coldly without any emotions. Su Shirching gave Xing a kick. "Useless thing." He lifted his eyes and looked at Yi Liangqiu. "Remember, Xing is suffering because of you." He gestured for the man to lift his leg and sat down. "I'll count to 3. If you don't agree, your Missy will have sex with someone else." As he spoke, he looked at Yi Liangqiu. "This is what you get for being disobedient. What do you have to say?" From now on, she would have someone else, and it would be impossible for her to be with Qin Anlin. Moreover, he would also send a big gift to Qin Anlin. Thinking of Qin Anlin's expression, it must be very interesting. Really, Yi Liangqiu's eyes were filled with coldness. "There's nothing to say." Su Shirching looked at her suspiciously, but he soon sneered. "You're a smart person." As he finished, he looked at Xing one. Xing was lying on the ground and panting. After he heard that, he quickly crawled over and hugged Su Shirching's leg. "Mr. Su, I beg you, please let Missy go. Missy will be obedient in the future. She will listen to you." Su Shirching leaned forward and patted his face lightly. Xing was stunned. His eyes were wide open as he looked at Su Shirching. He didn't understand. Why could Sir be so cruel to his own daughter and let someone else rape her? Missy was as noble as a fairy. Just thinking about it made him feel guilty. How could he do such a thing to her? Chapter 17:30. His gaze was filled with sorrow as he looked at Yi Liangqiu. She had been very calm. "Xing, she is my daughter. You and she are not from the same world. If you are cruel to her, you will walk in her world." Su Shirching said coldly and threw a gun to him. "If she is not willing, you know what to do." Xing looked at the gun by his feet and was stunned for a long time before he crawled over and picked it up. He did not mind that he was like a dog. He only minded that he could not protect Missy even if he was like a dog. He was stupid to spoil Missy's plans and implicate her. Xing looked up and looked at Su Shirching. He asked softly, "Really? If I have sex with Missy, I will be able to have her?" Su Shirching raised his hand, and one of his underlings passed him a bottle of medicine. Su Shirching took it and poured out a pill from the bottle and placed it on Xing's palm. "This can help you. Do you want to eat it yourself or Missy? It's up to you." Xing's eyes were bloodshot. He looked at the pill for a long time before he picked it up and put it into his mouth. "Very good." Su Shirching smiled faintly. Xing, turn into a wild beast." Xing stood up slowly. He walked towards Yi Liangqiu, grabbed her, and kissed her lips. His body was firm. She was trapped in his arms, and it was almost painful. He kissed her forcefully. Their lips were rubbing against each other. His eyes were wide open as he looked at her. She was the same. Xing's eyes were filled with apology and sorrow. "Missy, I'm sorry." He picked her up and walked toward the small, dark room at the side. Su Shirching did not stop him. Liangqiu was his daughter after all. It was fine as long as the matter was settled. He could not make things difficult for her. After all, he still needed her in the future. Xing carried Yi Liangqiu into the house, and she was immediately pressed against the wall. Xing's body was very hot, and his breathing was messy. He was panting with every breath he took. "Missy, I can't hold on for long. In a while, you have to scream, understand?" He whispered hoarsely behind her ear. Yi Liangqiu, who had been tense the whole time, finally relaxed a little. "Xing, I have implicated you." She sighed softly. "I don't blame you." From a moment she returned to the Su family. She was prepared to accept anything, including the worst. Xing was stunned, and his body tensed up. "Eldest miss, you have to call him later." He closed his eyes and pressed his large palm against her shoulder. He carefully held her in his hand and didn't let her back touch the rough wall. He was a rough person, but the young miss was of noble birth. He didn't want to hurt her. She heard the sound of fabric ripping, and her whole body froze. However, The expected pain, an unbearable pain, did not happen. Only Xing's face was flushed. He leaned forward and pretended to be oblivious. He let out a passionate voice and pinched her shoulder. He begged in a low and hoarse voice, "Missy, can you call me twice?" This was the only way for Su Shicheng to let her go and think that she was really violated by Xing. Liangqiu knew that he was in pain. He had taken Su Shicheng's medicine, and he must be having an orgasm now. However, he was unbelievably gentle. He endured it and even protected her. Liangqiu's eyes were filled with warmth. She leaned her face on Xing's shoulder and said softly, "I'm sorry." Sorry was not enough to express her apology to him. Xing smiled bitterly. He didn't say anything and continued to act. Liangqiu lay on her stomach and closed her eyes. She let out a painful sound that no one would doubt the authenticity of it. About 5 minutes later, a stream of hot blood splashed beside her legs. Then, a gun was stuffed into her hand. Liangqiu was stunned. "Eldest miss, Xing can't hold it in anymore." Xing lowered his head and rested it on her neck. Chapter 17:31. There was a strong smell of blood in the air. That was Xing's blood. That was all his desire and love for her. He liked her, but he knew that they were not compatible. Hence, he was willing to sacrifice himself for her. Liangqiu held the gun in her hand. Her body was trembling, and her voice was trembling. Xing, how could he be so stupid? How could he do that? Actually, she did not care much about it. Her so-called self-esteem was nothing in exchange for an innocent life. Moreover, she was the one who dragged him into this. Otherwise, Xing would be fine. One day, he might marry a kind girl from his hometown and have a cute child. She was trembling. That trembling went all the way to her heart and soul. Her fingers were stained with Xing's hot blood. She had no other thoughts but to let him live. Xing lifted his eyes slightly. His gaze was filled with pain. "Elder miss, Xing's death is not to be regretted." This was because he had treated her excessively in his dreams. He was too greedy. His forehead was filled with beads of perspiration. Drop by drop, it dripped down his forehead. His legs could not support him, and he slipped twice. Liangqiu immediately supported him. "No, I won't let you die." There was a flurry of footsteps at the door. She looked at the door and threw the gun in her hand. "I didn't shoot him." "No, it's him." She held her head with her long and bloody fingers and shook her head vigorously. Xing lost his support and slid down in an instant. His body was full of blood. Su Shicheng frowned. "What happened?" Xing turned his head and tilted it again. He squeezed out a sentence. "Xing deserved it." Su Shicheng looked at Liangqiu. "Did you shoot him?" "No." Liangqiu's voice was a little shrill. Her messy and wet hair stuck to her face. She looked extremely pathetic. She looked at Xing blankly. She looked at his bleeding body and said blankly, "It's not my fault. You were the one who wanted to do that to me. It's not my fault." Su Shicheng squinted his eyes and sneered. "Send Xing to the hospital." 2 men in black carried Xing away. Then Su Shicheng squatted down. His gaze became affectionate as he looked at Liangqiu. "You must be very scared, right? Daddy is here. No one can bully you." The withered and yellow hand gently embraced her and brought her to his shoulder. But what he said next was cold and ruthless. "I will give the recording to Qin Anlin. Think about how he will react when he hears it." Liangqiu suddenly raised her eyes and stared at Su Shicheng. Her gaze was extremely unfamiliar. She couldn't understand why this man, who was her father, could do such a cruel thing to her. Before she could think clearly, she had already asked softly, "What do I have to do to not tell him?" Su Shicheng gently turned her face. Then, he slowly stood up and looked down at his daughter. "You're finally negotiating with me, aren't you?" Su Shicheng's eyes flashed coldly. "I want King entertainment. Do you understand?" His fingers pinched her chin. "I know you have a way. Qin Anlin's weakness is you." Liangqiu pursed her lips. "I want ATV's shares." Chapter 17:32. He leaned over and said softly, "You feel guilty now, don't you?" But let me tell you, one day, when you obtain supreme power, you will get used to other people's sacrifices. With that, he stood up. I will take Qin Pei away. Before you acquire King Entertainment, you will not see him again. Before Liangqiu could speak, Su Shiqing turned around and smiled coldly. I know what you are most afraid of. Suddenly, the blood and strength in her body seemed to be sucked out. Su Shiqing actually knew all along. She could not hide anything from him. Su Shiqing turned around and left. He raised his hand and asked someone to take Qin Pei away. Liangqiu had seen through Qin Pei. After what happened a year ago, Qin Pei was becoming more and more inhuman. Without making a sound, he was carried away in a daze. In the cold dungeon, Liangqiu was left alone. Her body was cold. She lowered her head and looked at the blood on her hands. This pair of hands could not be washed clean. From a moment she returned to the Su family, it had been washed clean. She went to the hospital to see Xing. His life was saved, but it was unlikely that he would have another child. Liangqiu stood outside the ward and did not disturb Xing. After that, she begged Su Shiqing to give Xing to her. After Xing recovered, he stayed by her side. She knew that every pair of eyes in the Su family villa could be watching her at any time. Su Shiqing could be aware of everything she did. She was forced to a dead end. Sometimes, when there was no way out, she could only turn back. In the quiet car, Xing was driving while Liangqiu was in the back seat. Linda was in the front passenger seat too. Liangqiu said faintly, Xing, you can rest for 2 more months. Xing's complexion was not as good as before, but he was still all right. He smiled and said, I can't stay idle. In his heart, he was grateful to Missy. She had taken him from Su Shiqing's hands. Otherwise, his life would have been worse than death. Missy did not mention that matter again, and he would not mention it. No matter how useless Xing was, he still had some pride as a man. He drove a young lady and Linda all the way to a studio. I'll wait in the car. Liangqiu nodded. Okay. Linda followed her to the studio inside. Walking in the narrow corridor, Linda couldn't help but say, Mr. Yi, actually, you don't have to shoot. I will make a comeback and make a film. Liangqiu looked at Linda. This advertisement is the best way to make a comeback. Because it was explosive enough, there was a topic to talk about. Linda was stunned and didn't come to her senses for a long time. Liangqiu pursed her lips and smiled bitterly. I really can't turn back. If she wanted to live, if she wanted the people around her to live, she could only do as Su Shiqing said. However, when Su Shiqing stood at the highest point, she would ruthlessly fall down, smashing his body into pieces. Linda didn't really understand, but she didn't say anything more. She always felt that Mr. Yi was a little different recently, but she couldn't tell what exactly was different. It seemed that there was more coldness in his eyes, and there wasn't much warmth in them. She opened the door for Liangqiu. The studio was already prepared. The CEO knew his way and didn't make things difficult for them. He cleared the set, and the cameraman was also the one filming. Chapter 1733. Liangqiu asked them to do the post-production after she had seen the trailer. However, she had an agreement with the company that the advertisement would only be broadcasted on ATV for half a year. Everything was calm and peaceful. Su Shiqing did not appear often. He probably knew that she was disgusted by the sight of him, so he called her most of the time. What he was most concerned about was when ATV would be able to dominate the entertainment industry. Liangqiu hung up the phone and looked at the trailer sent by P&G on the table. She inserted the CD into the computer and clicked on it to watch. The advertisement was shot in the bathroom. Naturally, it was a little erotic. However, she definitely did not show her legs. That pair of fair legs should be a stunt double that was shot in the post-production. As it was not considered as showing her legs, she did not call them to question them. Instead, she continued to watch the trailer. The trailer was shot well, and there were no problems. The CEO of the company was rather respectful as he allowed her to watch the trailer first before deciding whether to broadcast it. After Liangqiu finished watching the trailer, she took out her phone and gave the other party a reply. After she hung up the phone, she closed her eyes and leaned against the back of the chair. She felt a little exhausted. Su Shicheng had transferred all his shares to her name. He was not afraid that she would play tricks on him. Yu Liangqiu looked at the report in her hands and pursed her lips. She would give Su Shicheng all the glory, and that day would be the day of his death. There was a knock on the door. She looked up and looked at Xing. Xing's expression was very calm, as though he was following her dutifully. It was as though that incident had never happened. "Elder Miss, the car is ready. We can go to the airport any time." Yu Liangqiu nodded and stood up. Xing naturally took over the briefcase from her and followed beside her. When they got into the car, Xing's voice was a little soft. "Elder Miss, can you trust Xing? What's wrong?" Yu Liangqiu sat down and asked in surprise. It had been quite some time since that incident. Xing had been following her for about a month or two, and he had never mentioned anything. She was a little surprised when he asked her this question. Xing turned around and said calmly, "The person serving Mr. Su is a relative of mine from the same hometown." Yu Liangqiu was stunned. Xing pursed his lips tightly. "I know Missy's concern. You're afraid of implicating others. But Mr. Su, he will hurt a lot of people." His eyes narrowed. "And I hate it too." Yu Liangqiu had never seen such an expression on Xing's face before. She couldn't react in time. "Eldest young mistress, feel free to tell me if there's anything you need Xing to do." Xing gritted his teeth. "Xing has already died once, and there's no hope in the future. Don't be afraid." Yu Liangqiu's throat seemed to be blocked. After a while, she said softly, "Next time, I won't let you take risks." To her, Xing was a stranger. However, she only had Xing by her side. To a certain extent, Xing gave her a sense of security. In that darkness, he was the one who sacrificed himself. Those few minutes, the blood he shed for her, she would never forget it. She didn't say it because she didn't want to hurt his pride, but it didn't mean that she didn't forget or feel guilty. Xing started the car and sent her to the airport. Just when the car stopped, Su Shicheng's mobile phone rang. Yu Liangqiu picked up the call. "Where are you?" Su Shicheng's voice was a little gloomy. Recently, he had been checking her location from time to time. Chapter 1734. Su Shicheng's voice was stern. "Who are you going to meet in Hong Kong?" "Du Yuesheng." Yu Liangqiu sneered. "I'm sure you know that ATV's cash flow is poor, and Du Yuesheng has always been interested in my 10% shares of King Entertainment." As soon as she finished speaking, Su Shicheng was surprised. "You really dare to sell that 10%? He had been thinking about this 10% for a long time, but to cover it up, he didn't tell her directly. But now, this 10% was going to fall into Du Yuesheng's hands. Who didn't know Du Yuesheng's ambition? But if Liangqiu did this, Qin Anlin would probably break up with her. Su Shicheng thought about it and felt that it was a good deal. He was satisfied and hung up the phone. Yu Liangqiu looked at Xing. "I've booked 2 plane tickets. You're coming with me." Xing was stunned. He had a feeling that Missy was going to do something important. She actually brought him along? "Xing, didn't I say that I can look for you if there's anything?" Yu Liangqiu opened the car door and waited for him to get out. She smiled. "From now on, we can't let Su Shicheng catch us for any mistakes, understand?" Xing nodded his head in confusion. Yu Liangqiu stayed in Hong Kong for 2 days and sold 10% of King Entertainment's shares for 50 billion. After signing the contract, she left Hong Kong. But she didn't expect Du Yuesheng to hold a celebration party in Hong Kong and make it so big. While she was on the plane, the financial and entertainment circles of B-City were in an uproar. Qin Anlin was accused of being cheated by a deity. He felt like he was being cheated on. Yu Liangqiu didn't know that when the plane from Hong Kong to B-City landed, Xing helped her with her luggage and followed behind her. When she passed through the exit, she was surprised to see 2 rows of reporters. When she came out, she was blinded by the flashing lights. "Miss Yi, or should I say Mrs. Qin, did you consider President Qin's feelings when you sold your shares in King Entertainment? Mr. Yi, does this mean that ATV has reached the end of its tether, or is Mr. Yi preparing to fight with King Entertainment? Mr. Yi, do you think President Qin is already on his way to the airport? Will he divorce you?" Xing looked at Yu Liangqiu worriedly. Yi Lianxiu just put on her sunglasses and walked out from the VIP passageway, ignoring the reporters who were taking photos behind her. Xing followed behind her and caught up with her. He tilted his head and looked at her. "Mr. Yi, what's going on?" As Yi Lianxiu walked, she said, Du Yuesheng has great ambitions for the Chinese market. He's not satisfied with just 10% this time. Xing didn't know much about business matters, but he knew it was serious. Besides, those reporters just said that President Qin and Mr. Yi would divorce. He pursed his lips and hesitated. "Do you want to explain to President Qin?" This time, Yi Lianxiu stopped in her tracks and looked at Xing. She forced a smile. There's no need to explain this kind of thing. It was useless to explain. She knew better than anyone what that 10% meant. It meant that Qin Anlin trusted her and the last bit of trust between them. She had sold this trust and her past to someone else. She let out a deep breath and patted Xing. "Let's go." Chapter 1735. Xing looked at her deeply and didn't say anything in the end. He didn't understand most of the conversations he had with Missy. Now he learned to speak less so that Missy wouldn't be upset. However, both of them didn't expect to bump into Qin Anlin once they got out of the airport. To be precise, Qin Anlin came looking for them personally. It showed how exasperated he was. Xing was held down by someone, and he couldn't move. Yi Lianxiu frowned and looked at Qin Anlin, who was sitting at the back of the car. "Let him go." The person who was pressing Xing pressed Xing's head down again. Xing let out a groan. "Qin Anlin, did you hear me?" She kicked the car door and said in a hoarse voice, "Just come at me if you have any problems. Let Xing go." Qin Anlin turned his head slowly, and his gaze fell on her face. He sneered, "Come at you?" She pursed her lips into a straight line and looked at his dark eyes. She didn't feel confident. She used 10% of the money that he gave her in exchange for 50 billion yuan. She put it into her pocket quietly. Of course, she felt guilty. Qin Anlin continued to sneer. "Yi Lianxiu, he's just a follower. Is he worth your effort?" He knew her very well. How could he not see the worry on her face? Ironically, she was worried because of that little follower. A burly man. She remembered that he used to follow Su Shircheng. Now he was following her. Qin Anlin's gaze fell on Xing, and he took a few more glances at him. Su Shircheng had something on Yi Lianxiu, so she felt more or less uneasy. She stared at Qin Anlin, trying to determine if he knew something. However, Qin Anlin only looked at him for a while and asked his men to let Xing go. Xing refused to leave. Yi Lianxiu said calmly, "Drive the car back. President Qin will send me back." After she said that, Xing had no reason to stay. He threw her a worried look and walked towards Yi Lianxiu's car. Qin Anlin watched as Xing's car drove away. He retracted his gaze, took out a cigarette skillfully, and lit it up. He said faintly, "Why aren't you getting in the car?" Yi Lianxiu looked at him, pursed her lips, and got into the car. As soon as they got into the car, Kim started the engine. The car drove very fast, and she just got off the plane. Her head was a little dizzy, but she stubbornly did not say anything. "I didn't expect you to have such a huge appetite now." Qin Anlin rolled down the car window and flicked the cigarette ash away. Then, he turned his head and looked at her with a burning gaze. "Why? Can he comfort you?" Yi Lianxiu's heart skipped a beat, but seeing the jealousy on his face, he probably didn't know about it. She turned her face to the other side and said faintly, "Qin Anlin, do you really have to talk to me about this? I thought you'd be more willing to talk to me about 10% of the things." He held the cigarette in his hand and pinched her cheeks with 2 fingers, forcing her to look at him. The cigarette, but in his hand, was less than a centimeter away from her soft cheeks. If he wasn't careful, he would burn her. He stared at her with a burning gaze. "Yi Lianxiu, aren't you afraid of dying quickly?" She raised her head. "What do you want?" His fingers exerted more force. "What do I want?" What did he not want to do anything to her? However, what could he do to her? Yi Lianxiu, she dared to act so recklessly because he loved her. Yes, he loved her shamefully. Chapter 1736. Yi Lianxiu, she dared to act so recklessly because he loved her. Yes, He loved her humbly and shamefully. His heart ached, but then it hardened again. He had been soft-hearted towards her for too long, and she was getting more and more out of hand. That 10% was all I could give you when I proposed. Yuliancio, you know what that means. His gaze became colder. Did you hesitate when you sold it? Did you waver, huh? He took the cigarette, but with his other hand. She thought that she would be more at ease, but it made it easier for him to exert force. Her cheeks immediately turned purple. Those who didn't know better would think that she had been forced to do something indescribable for him. No, she looked straight into his eyes, her lips moving slightly as she squeezed out 2 words. He let go of her angrily. Losing her support, she fell into the back seat and hit the back of her head. Through the pain, she vaguely heard what he said. She wanted to hear it clearly, but her instincts were against it. She didn't want to hear it because those words were too cruel. Yuliancio's gaze stopped on his face and didn't move away for a long time. She only heard the last word. Get lost. He wanted her to leave. Kam looked worried and stopped the car by the side of the road. He had thought that Yuliancio would be chased out of the car, but a man in a rage could change his mind at any time. It was as unreliable as a woman's menopause. Kam, get out of the car. His voice was tense. Yuliancio's body froze. Just as he understood her, she understood him too. Kam felt the same way. There weren't many people on the road, and it was dark. If President Qin were to do anything violent to Mr. Yi wouldn't be able to survive. Kam's heart softened and he was worried. But Qin Anlin narrowed his eyes. Are you going to get off? Or should I drag her off? Kay sighed inwardly and didn't dare to say anything else. He opened the car door and got out. Just as he got out of the car, he heard the sound of the car window locking. He hesitated for a moment, then decided to leave. In the car, the light was dim, which made his face look even scarier. Qin Anlin, if you want a divorce. Before she could finish, he interrupted her with his kiss. A very rough kiss. He held her face in his hands and pressed her against the car window. He pressed her down tightly and kissed her passionately. His scorching hot lips toward her lips, and soon, her lips started to bleed. He tasted the taste of fresh blood. He was like a beast, even more savage. On this day, he received news. He felt as if he had returned to the day his mother passed away. She was just as hateful. She didn't explain and didn't care if they were breaking up. She just wanted to do what she wanted to do. He bit her neck and said in a hoarse voice, Yuliancio, have you ever loved me? She was stuck to the car door. As long as he opened the door, she would be doomed. Her lips moved a little, but he didn't allow her to speak. He kissed her lips again roughly. He bit her fiercely as if he was venting the dissatisfaction and anger in his heart. His body was trembling. He had a feeling that he was going to lose her. He had to let go of his pride and hatred so that he could have her. But if he did that, he wouldn't be Qin Anlin anymore. Chapter 1737. Finally, he let go of her and leaned against the back of the seat. His breathing was messy, but his eyes were clear. She was in a mess as she leaned against the side pathetically. After a long time, he finally turned his face and looked at her. Go! But she couldn't move at all. That kiss, just now, seemed to have used up all her energy. In the dark car, he looked at her. Then, he took out a cigarette from his jacket and slowly lit it up. He let out a long puff of smoke and said indifferently, Yuliancio, I once gave in. Isn't it funny? His voice was bitter and bitter, with a hint of disgust. But I won't do it again. He had even abandoned his own mother because of this woman. He had overestimated her love. He had thought that no matter what she had done, she would still love him. But now he didn't think so, and as he spoke, she kept looking at him. She knew clearly that she had challenged his bottom line. She had expected this outcome before she had done it. She lowered her eyes and sighed softly. Anlin, find a woman. This was something she would never have said in the past. In the past, she had been so spirited. Even if he hated her, she would have accepted it. She felt that he was hers, and she wouldn't allow anyone to take him away from her. But now, looking at his pained expression, she would rather he had someone else. At least he would be happier. As soon as she finished speaking, her chin was pinched. His strength was enough to crush her. Even in the dark of the car, she could still see his gloomy face. He repeated her words word by word. Find a woman? He pinched her chin tightly and pulled her in front of him. He stared into her eyes and said, That way, you won't feel too guilty, right? He held her chin tightly as though he was holding her entire soul. Narrowing his eyes, he said, Liangxiu, say something. Her lips trembled slightly. Looking at his dark face, she gritted her teeth and said, Yes. Great. Really great. This was the woman he loved. This was the woman who had always said she loved him. Liangxiu, where's your love? Has it been fed to the dogs? He gave a faint smile. Although his voice was soft, it had a hint of madness to it. She could not answer. Qin Anlin let go of her. Get out of the car. She retreated until her body was pressed against the car door. The faint light from outside shone in, shrouding her face in darkness. His fingers trembled as he held the car door. Finally, he opened it. When she went down, her legs were a little weak. The night wind outside was slightly cold, brushing against her face like a knife. B-City was brightly lit. Those lights climbed into the distance, forming a long golden dragon. The black limousine next to him quickly drove away, leaving no trace of nostalgia. Liangxiu felt a chill run down her spine. After a long pause, she finally walked forward. She couldn't stop because it was too cold here. When Xing found her, she was so cold that she almost fainted. Sitting in the car, she felt as though she had been in heaven for a lifetime. Xing stopped the car at the entrance of a convenience store and bought a cup of hot milk for her. Liangxiu drank half of it and felt that her body was much warmer. However, she still had a cold and her nose was running nonstop. Xing knew that she was upset and did not dare to disturb her. He only drove quietly. Chapter 1738. Xing was stunned for a moment and quickly said, It depends on whether this person is worth Xing's sacrifice. If it's worth it, then Xing will do his best, even if it means bleeding. After he said that, he felt that it was inappropriate. It seemed like he was asking for credit, so he coughed lightly and said, Missy, that's not what Xing meant. Liangxiu turned around and looked at Xing quietly. She pursed her lips and said, Why would I think that way? Xing focused on driving, but the car still arrived at the hospital. She looked at the building in front of her and didn't get out of the car. Missy, let's go and take a look. It'll be bad if you fall sick. Xing's voice was filled with concern. Liangxiu smiled faintly and said, It's okay. However, Xing seemed to be stubborn. He insisted on sending her to the hospital for a checkup before he could be at ease. In the end, she said, Let's go to the pharmacy to buy some medicine. The doctors are already off work now. There aren't any good doctors in the emergency department. Xing wanted to say something, but Liangxiu had already asked him to drive. He had no choice but to listen to her. She was seriously ill after catching a cold. In the few days that they were in the Su residence, the situation outside changed drastically. The shareholders of ATV all changed sides and supported King Entertainment's acquisition of ATV. Apart from Su Shirqing's few diehard supporters, 40% of ATV's shares fell into the hands of King Entertainment, or rather, Qin Anlin. He was very close to the 50% that Liangxiu held. The atmosphere was heavy at the ATV senior management meeting on Monday. There were very few people speaking, because there weren't many constructive ideas. King Entertainment's acquisition of ATV had a strong smell of life and death struggle. How could Liangxiu not know that the senior management of ATV had different intentions? They were probably thinking about how to keep their positions when the new owner arrived. But they were too naive. Qin Anlin was already crazy. The first thing he would do when he got ATV now was to destroy ATV. He would destroy Su Shirqing's last trace of persistence. Liangxiu glanced around. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Below, no one made a sound. Perhaps this was what they meant by choosing sides. Qin Anlin had not yet arrived at ATV, but he already had a large number of supporters. Liangxiu smiled. Driving back in the evening, Su Shirqing also returned to the Su house with a gloomy face. Half of ATV has been occupied by Qin Anlin. Liangxiu dropped the bag in her hand and sat on the sofa. I have a suggestion. Su Shicheng sat opposite her with a gloomy face. After a long time, he said, "What suggestion?" "Light assets." Yu Liangxiu smiled faintly. "Sell the ATV building, reorganize the company, and become a new investment-oriented company." How could Su Shicheng be willing? The greatest pride of his life was ATV, the logo on the ATV building. Bastard. If the ATV building is sold, will it still be ATV? Su Shicheng was very angry. Yu Liangxiu did not force him. She just chuckled. But 40% of the ATV building is already Qin Anlin's. Su Shicheng was very dissatisfied with what she said. With a gloomy face, he said, "If it weren't for your inaction, how could it be so bleak?" Chapter 1739. Su Shicheng's old face was completely black, as if he had received a critical hit of 10,000 points. He hit the ground hard with the walking stick in his hand. "I don't care. I must get King Entertainment." As he spoke, his gaze became a little greedy. "I can give up on ATV, but I want King Entertainment." If it was possible, Yu Liangxiu really wanted to take him to the neurosurgery department for a checkup to see if there was anything wrong with him. He couldn't even keep ATV, and yet he still wanted King Entertainment. Looking at Su Shicheng carefully, she realized that he was indeed crazy, the crazy kind. Yu Liangxiu smiled. "Dad, if you think I'm useless, sure, I can return the shares of ATV to you." Su Shicheng's old face became even uglier. He glared at her. "What's the point of saying all this now?" He stretched out his skinny hand. "I want King Entertainment." Yu Liangxiu looked at his hand, so skinny that there was not much flesh on it. Her heart skipped a beat. She knew that he wasn't as healthy as he used to be. Perhaps it was the little thing that Xing got people to put in Su Shicheng's food and drink that was quietly draining Su Shicheng's body bit by bit. Originally, Su Shicheng still paid attention to his health and basically didn't touch women anymore. But recently, she heard from Xing that Su Shicheng was playing with women again. He would probably get people to pick 1 or 2 beautiful women to send to his place every week. When Xing talked about this, he would mutter that Su Shicheng was a complete pervert. It was good to be a pervert. Yu Liangxiu knew that what she had done was full of sin, but she didn't regret it. In Su Shicheng's eyes, human life was worthless. Every day that he was around, there would only be more people who would be hurt. Yu Liangxiu's fingers gently held Su Shicheng's hand. "I have already thought of a foolproof method." Su Shicheng's eyes lit up as he looked at her. Yu Liangxiu leaned over and whispered a few words. After saying that, Su Shicheng's eyes stared at her. After a long time, he asked coldly, "Aren't you afraid that he'll deal with you?" At that time, I already had King Entertainment, didn't I? Yu Liangxiu's lips curled into a cold smile. There was no turning back. Su Shicheng's gaze fell on her face. After studying it for a long time, he smiled lightly. "Liangxiu, you are very much like me." "No, I was forced by you." Yu Liangxiu didn't give him any face. As for Su Shicheng, because of the beautiful blueprint, he did not bicker with her and was satisfied. In his heart, ATV was long gone. All that was left was King Entertainment. With King Entertainment, what did he need AFC for? Liangxiu's plan would definitely succeed. He knew Qin Anlin's weakness too well. After Su Shicheng left, Yu Liangxiu stood in the living room and looked at the dark night outside for a long time. Xing came over and said softly, "Missy, let's eat." "You haven't eaten anything all day." Yu Liangxiu snapped out of her trance and looked at Xing. "I can't eat." "Even if you can't eat, you have to eat something," Xing advised gently. Yu Liangxiu took another look at him. Xing was different from before. In the past, he was a rough man. But now, she couldn't tell he was different. It was probably because after that incident, both psychologically and physically, there had been some changes. In the end, she still ate something. Xing sat opposite her and ate. Chapter 1740. However, Yu Liangxiu was thinking about something else at this moment. She needed the chins to protect her. She put down the chopsticks in her hand and looked at Xing. "Arrange something for me tomorrow. I want to meet Kaim." Xing was stunned. Yi Lianxiu looked at him. Is there any difficulty? Xing shook his head. Yi Lianxiu smiled. Only let him know, understand? Xing looked up at her and said softly, Mr. Yi, I will protect you. She smiled again and didn't say anything. She sat for a while and went upstairs slowly. Xing looked at her back. Although he was not cultured, he was not a blockhead. He could feel that Elder Miss treated him well because she wanted to make it up to him. However, he didn't want her to feel guilty. He only wanted her to be happy. In the future, if Elder Miss still wanted to be with President Qin, he would help her even if he had to risk his life. Yi Lianxiu went upstairs, took a shower, and lay on the bed. When she closed her eyes, she would think of Qin Anlin. However, from that day onwards, they didn't contact each other anymore. She clenched her fists. Success or failure depended on this. She knew how dangerous what she was doing was. If she was not careful, she would be doomed. The next day, she met Kaim in a secret coffee shop. As promised, Kaim arrived alone and booked a small private room. Yi Lianxiu and Xing went over together. Xing stood guard outside, while Yi Lianxiu opened the door of the private room. Kaim looked up, and his eyes met Yi Lianxiu's. After a while, he smiled bitterly. Mr. Yi is here. Yi Lianxiu sat opposite him and smiled. You used to call me Lianxiu. It's never been so distant. Kaim sighed. Mr. Yi, the fact that I'm here to see you alone shows that I'm not a stranger. Others didn't know, but Kaim knew very well that President Qin was drafting an agreement related to their marriage. It was hard for him to say. However, President Qin seemed to have drafted it for a long time and never sent it out. He must still be reluctant in his heart. Yi Lianxiu could also see Qin Anlin's attitude from Kaim's attitude. If the situation wasn't too serious, Kaim wouldn't be like this. She felt a little sour in her heart, but she did not mind. She took out a document from her bag and handed it to Kaim. Find a way to get President Qin to sign this document. She paused for a moment before saying softly, Don't let him find out what's written on it. There was a look of surprise in Kaim's eyes. He took it. After reading a few lines, his expression changed. Mr. Yi, it's just like what you saw. No matter what happens in the future, this document is very important. She pressed her hand on the document. I've already signed it. Kaim, no matter what happens between President Qin and me in the future, you have to stand by his side and bring him back quietly. Kaim's eyes were a little dazed. He didn't understand what she meant. You'll know when the time comes. She smiled bitterly. Kaim, if I said that I had my reasons, would you believe me? Kaim nodded and said firmly, I believe you. There are many things that I think too simply, but there's no turning back now. She retracted her hand and lowered her head. Also, don't tell him that I love him. Yi Lianxiu slowly stood up. I have my reasons for doing this. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.